Namaste. I am Dr. S.Padmapriya speaking to you. Today, I will be covering the important chapter of factor pricing, which comes under Unit 1 of Microeconomics of UGC Net Economics syllabus. I have already covered the first 5 lessons of UGC Net Economics syllabus of Microeconomics. So, today we will be going on to this important lesson of factor pricing. So, what is factor pricing? In economics, we refer to a factor as a means of production of a commodity. Factor pricing is also known as theory of distribution. It is the theory of how prices for various factors of production are determined. There are 4 factors of production: land, labor, capital, and organization. We all know how the price of a product is determined. The price of a product is determined by the economic forces of demand and supply. Likewise, the price of a factor of production is determined by the forces of demand and supply for the particular factor of production. We know that land earns rent, labor earns wages, capital earns interest, and organization earns profits. And what is the meaning of functional distribution? The functional distribution relates to the division of income among various factors of production. Now, there is an important concept called as marginal productivity theory of distribution. According to the marginal productivity theory of distribution, the reward of a factor is equal to its marginal product, also known as marginal physical product. It is the increment made to the total output by employing an additional unit of a factor. So, essentially it deals with the addition to the productivity because of the additional unit of a particular factor of production. That particular factor of production can be labor, or it can be capital, or it can be land or organization. Now, what is factor pricing under perfect competition? Given the demand and supply conditions of a factor service, a firm will continue to employ more units of a particular factor service as long as the additional revenue obtained from an additional unit of the factor price or factor service exceeds the extra cost of employing it. So, that is the concept of factor pricing under perfect competition. So, we understand that the factor, that is land or labor or capital or organization, will be employed as long as the additional revenue obtained from that additional unit of the factor service or marginal productivity exceeds the extra cost of employing it. Now we come to the concept of land. Land gets rent. Rent refers to the payment for the use of land or house or building. Now we come to the important concept of Ricardian theory of rent. See, basically we have different theories of rent. The first important theory is the theory of Ricardo, given by David Ricardo. According to David Ricardo, rent is that portion of the produce of the earth which is paid to the landlord for the use of the original and indestructible powers of the soil. So basically what David Ricardo says is that rent is what is paid to a landlord for the use of the original powers of land, which is indestructible. So according to Ricardo, rent is a differential surplus. Rent is accrued to superior lands over inferior lands. Then we have the concept of scarcity rent. The concept of scarcity rent was enunciated by Malthus. According to him, it arises due to inflexible or rigid supply of land. Now, just because we want to get more land, can we create more land? It is not possible. The availability of land is always fixed or limited. Therefore, rent, here the concept of scarcity rent comes because of the inflexible or rigid supply of land. Then we have the concept of quasi-rent. Alfred Marshall was the person who gave this concept of quasi-rent. Quasi-rent is the short-run surplus over the average variable cost or prime cost. It refers to the income derived from appliances and machines during the short period. So this is a concept of quasi-rent given by Alfred Marshall. So basically he says two things. One is that quasi-rent is something that we get in the short run, or we can get in the, not in the long run, but in the short run, and it is a surplus over the prime cost, also known as the average variable cost. And then we have the most important theory of rent, which was given by Joan Robinson in her book, The Economics of Imperfect Competition, wherein she explains the modern theory of rent. According to the modern theory, rent is determined by the demand for and supply of land. Now we come to the important concept of labor. Now labor is an important factor of production. It earns wages. Wages refer to the payments made for the services of labor. Wages are of various kinds. The first that we all know is nominal wages. Nominal wages are the money wages or the payments received by the laborer in cash. Whereas real wages is the money wages divided by the price level. So we may say that the money wage has increased, but it is not necessary that when the money wage increases, the real wage is said to have increased, because it could not have increased as much because of the increased price level. Now we have 4 important theories of wages given by the classical and neoclassical economists. The first theory is known as the subsistence theory of wages. The subsistence theory of wages was given by the French physiocrats. It is also known as iron law of wages. According to the subsistence theory, wage must cover the minimum subsistence for a laborer. Then we have wage fund theory. It was first given by Adam Smith. According to him, wage rate is equal to wage fund divided by number of workers. Then we have residual claimant theory. This theory was given by F.A. Walker. According to it, wages are the residual portion after paying the reward for all the other factors. Then we have marginal productivity theory of wages. According to it, wages under perfect competition are determined by the demand and supply of labor. Wages are equal to marginal productivity. Now we have the most important theory of wages, which is the modern theory of wages. The modern theory of wages takes into consideration both the demand and supply of labor. Under perfect competition, the wage for labor will be equal to the marginal revenue product. But in the long run, wages should be equal to the marginal revenue product and also equal to the average revenue product. So that is the idea. Then we come to the concept of capital. Capital earns interest. Interest is the payment for the use or service of capital or loanable funds. Now we have 2 important concepts of interest. One is gross interest and another is net interest. Gross interest is the total amount which a debtor pays to the creditor. Gross interest consists of pure interest, insurance against risk, wages of management, and return for inconvenience. Net interest is pure interest, which is gross interest minus reward for risk taking plus reward for inconvenience plus reward for management. Then we have theories of interest. There are various theories of interest like classical theory, loanable funds theory, liquidity preference theory of interest, and modern theory of interest. Now, what is this classical theory of interest? It is also known as the real theory of interest. It is also known as savings investment theory of interest. It is also known as supply and demand theory of interest. The classical economists have explained it in terms of thrift and productivity. Now you have the other important theory, which is the productivity theory. It explains the interest from the side of demand. The interest was paid because the production with the help of the capital was greater than without it. Then we have abstinence theory. It was given by Nassau Sr. According to Nassau, interest is the reward for abstinence from using the money. So basically what he's meaning to tell is that a person receives interest because he abstains from using that money and gives it to somebody else who will use it for the time being. Then we have another theory, which is the waiting theory. It was given by Marshall. According to him, interest is the compensation for waiting. Then we have the agio theory. It is also called psychological theory, which was advocated by John Ray and popularized by Irving Fisher. Then we have time preference theory. It was given by Fisher. Interest is a compensation for time preference. Thus, according to the classical theory, the rate of interest is determined by the interaction of demand for capital and the supply of savings. Now we come to the important theory of interest known as the loanable funds theory of interest. This theory is also very popular. According to this theory, interest is the price paid for the use of loanable funds. The rate of interest is determined by the equilibrium between demand for and supply of loanable funds in the credit market. Their theory of loanable funds was developed by Wicksell, O'Hlin, and Weiner. The supply of loanable funds includes savings, disordering, bank credit, and disinvestment. The demand for loanable funds includes investment, consumption, and hoarding. Now, if you look at the graph, which is 6.1, it shows the inverse relationship between interest rate and the demand for loanable funds. When the rate of interest is high, demand for loanable funds is low, and when the interest rate is low, demand for loanable funds is high. Hence, the demand for loanable funds, DD, slopes downward from left to right. Rate of interest is taken along the y-axis and demand for loanable funds is taken along the x-axis. When rate of interest is lower at R1, demand is D2. When rate of interest is R2, demand for loanable funds is lower at D1. Now we come to the liquidity preference theory of interest, which was determined by Keynes. According to Keynes, the rate of interest is determined by the demand for and supply of money. According to Lord Keynes, interest is the reward paid for parting with liquidity for a specified period. According to him, the desire for liquidity arises because of three reasons: the transaction motive, the precautionary motive, and the speculative motive. Then we have demand for money. The concept of demand for money. The demand for money changes with the interest rate. There is an inverse relationship between the rate of interest and the demand for money, which is liquidity preference. So what basically is the idea given by Keynes is that the demand for money is nothing but the liquidity preference. How much of that money does the person want to keep with himself? So liquidity preference curve slopes downward from left to right. Then we have supply of money. Who controls the supply of money? The supply of money is governed by the central bank of a country. As supply is not affected by the rate of interest, therefore the supply curve is parallel to the y-axis. Now, determination of interest rate. As per the liquidity preference theory of interest given by Lord Keynes, rate of interest is determined by the intersection of liquidity preference curve or demand curve and the supply curve of money. The graph above, E is the equilibrium point where Q1M or the supply of money curve and L, the demand for money curve, intersect. Superiority of the liquidity preference theory over the loanable funds theory. Number 1, the Keynesian theory is a stock analysis, whereas loanable funds theory is a flow analysis. Number 2, liquidity preference theory is more realistic than the loanable funds theory because the theory is nearer to the behavior of interest rate in the business world. Third, the loanable funds theory fails to fit in a general determinate system. Now we come to the important theory of interest given in the modern times, which is known as modern theory of interest. There are 4 determinants of the rate of interest according to the modern theory of interest. One is savings function, one is investment function, one is liquidity preference function, and the other is the supply of money. The modern theory of interest has 2 curves, IS curve and LM curve. The IS curve or the investment savings curve shows the equilibrium of the real sector. The LM curve or the liquidity preference quantity of money curve represents the equilibrium of the monetary sector. The IS curve slopes downward to the right. LM curve slopes upward to the right. As income increases, the liquidity preference increases, and consequently, the rate of interest also increases. Similarly, as income decreases, liquidity preference diminishes and the rate of interest comes down. Now here we see in graph 6.3 how the rate of interest is determined as per the modern theory of interest. The rate of interest is taken along the y-axis and income is taken along the x-axis, where y represents income. The LM and IS curves intersect at point E. R is the equilibrium rate of interest and Y is the equilibrium income, and the equilibrium point of intersection is E. If there is any deviation from equilibrium, certain forces will act in such a way so as to restore the equilibrium back to point E. Now we come to the next factor of production. Till now, we have already covered three major factors of production: land, labor, and capital. And now we come to organization. In economics, profit is a reward for entrepreneurial functions of decision making and uncertainty bearing. In other words, profit is the percentage of return on investment of capital. What are the various theories of profit? Rent theory of profit is the first important theory of profit. This was given by Francis L. Walker. Walker maintains that profit is the rent of ability. So basically, a person's ability is rented out, and therefore he gets the profit for giving that ability. Next, we have wage theory of profit given by Professor Taussig, who was a French person. Profits are best regarded as simply as a form of wages. So according to him, there is no great difference between wages given for a laborer and the wages for an entrepreneur. Okay, both are wages. Profits are also a form of wages according to Taussig. Next, we have risk theory of profit given by Professor Hawley. According to him, profit is a reward for risk taking. Then there is another theory which is known as uncertainty theory of profit. Professor Knight gives this uncertainty theory of profit. He believed that profit is a reward for uncertainty bearing. He divides risk into two kinds. Foreseeable risk. This kind of risk is foreseen by the entrepreneur. Examples: fire, floods, thefts, or risks in business. This can be insured by an insurance company. But what about the unforeseeable risks like competitive risk, technical risk, risk of government intervention, and trade cycle risk? Suddenly the economy can go into depression. Suddenly there can be a technical failure. Suddenly the competitor can do something and make his product or service superior. Then there can be risk of government intervention. So according to Professor Knight, insurable risk does not give rise to profit. Profit is the reward for non-insurable risk or unforeseen risk. Then we have dynamic theory of profit given by J.B. Clark. According to J.B. Clark, profit arises due to dynamic changes in the society. Profits arise as a dynamic surplus. In a stationary state, profits do not arise. He mentions about 5 changes which may give rise to profit. One is the changes in the size of population. Another is the change in the amount of capital. Another is the changes in production techniques. Another is the changes in the form of business organization. And another is changes in human wants. So basically, changes in population, changes in the amount of capital, changes in production techniques, changes in the form of business organization, and changes in human wants. All of these things leads to profits according to J.B. Clark. Next, we are given the innovation theory of profit by Joseph Schumpeter. This innovation theory of profit was given by Joseph Schumpeter. Then we have marginal productivity theory of profits. According to the marginal productivity theory of profits, the determination of the remuneration of the entrepreneur, just like any other factor, is explained in terms of marginal revenue productivity. Economists like Edgeworth, Chapman, Stigler, Stonier, and Haig have explained the concept of profit using this theory of marginal productivity. According to this theory, profit as a reward of an entrepreneur is determined by its marginal revenue productivity. The higher the marginal revenue productivity, the higher are the profits, and lower the marginal revenue productivity, the lower are the profits of the entrepreneur. Objectives of a firm. Profit maximization is a very important goal of a business firm. Then we have sales maximization, which is another important goal of a firm. Welfare of the employees and stakeholders is also an objective of the firm. Thus, we come to the end of this chapter of factor pricing, which is very important concept or very important lesson under microeconomics of UGC Net Economics syllabus. Thank you. Please refer to my previous videos for further information on the same subjects. Thank you. This is Dr. S.Padmapriya signing off.